going to be a multidisciplinary effort. This is a series of discussions. We're beginning with the topic today that looks at the intersection of health and spirituality. And we're going to follow on with other discussions that will span from economics to biology to genetics to other issues, including cultural and even the arts, as they impact health, as they impact the welfare of African Americans. Show us the next slide. Thank you, Paula. Now, I have a diagram here. Now, at a glance, it might look a little intimidating, but if we just take a minute to walk through it very quickly, I think it will get us all on the same page in terms of what we mean when we use the term resilience, because it has a very popular meaning that people use in day-to-day discussions. But I want to be sure we understand that we're working from the same page here. And as you can see, you might see in the upper right-hand corner, it comes from the Trans NIH Resilience Working Group. Now, for those of you who are not in the health or science field, the National Institutes of Health is the world's largest body doing medical research. So it is a part of the U.S. government, but it sponsors more medical research than any other institution on the planet. And they are very concerned and interested in the notion of resilience as well. And this is how they break it down. Going from left to right, in the top row, you see the words challenge, which basically means what a person or a population, or even in some instances, some NIH covers all sorts of research, even some of the animal models. What are the challenges that the individual or the community faces? And they can be classified by the type of challenge, by how strong a challenge it is, and how long that challenge lasts. Then moving to the right in the diagram, we consider systems. And this seeks to point out the fact that it can happen at different levels, that a challenge, a stressor that might demand resilience can happen from the environment, can come from the environment. People can be displaced by a flood, incredible stressor that has health consequences. It can happen at the community level when an African-American community has to absorb the shock of church-going people at Bible study being shot and killed in church. A tremendous group stressor for the community. Then it can happen on the individual level, going down, as you can see. And the individual is very, very interesting and complex. Perhaps even more complex than some of those big systems we just talked about as community and environment. The individual has, as you see on the bottom row of the middle panel in the slide, the individual has psychological dimensions, spiritual dimensions, social and behavioral dimensions. The individual also has a genetic makeup, and the molecules in the body of every system have their own responses potentially to the stressor, either absorbing it or not, maybe getting damaged from it. And there are more general physiologic systems within the body. There's the heart, there's the immune system, there's kidneys and lungs and so forth, and brain. All of these systems have a physiological functioning that can be impacted by that stressor. Now, and here's the punchline. What is resilience then? What is the response? What are the possible responses? First, you see the lightning bolt, which indicates that insult, that stressor, that problem. And it is a lightning bolt to suggest it is a shocking incident or a shocking episode. But it may not be just one sharp episode. It may be a chronic thing. It may be something that's ongoing, or it may be a combination of those things. And we as human beings have a response. Now, there's the resistant response, where somehow it just rolls off our back. But there is the very common response, where there is a period where we are reacting to it, maybe knocked off kilter, maybe upset, maybe your blood pressure rises briefly, maybe something much more significant happens. Then, after a while, and I'm not specifying how long, things turn, or they stay in a bad way. So one response, look at the red line going all the way down to the bottom, is that the system that's received the stressor collapses. Another response, midway up, is that the system responds and doesn't recover completely, or recovers in a way that's not healthy and causes other consequences. So you absorb the insult or the pain, but you are somehow set back in how you function, or how some part of your body or mind functions. In those two red lines for African Americans, I think one thing to sort of suggest is that when we look at disparities and how there are health problems that are common in the Black community, and more common perhaps than other communities, those red lines are what we're talking about. But there are other responses possible. You can recover from the stressor. You can absorb the hit and get back to where you were. Now, that recovery can be partial. So you may have sustained, let's go with the blood pressure example. Your blood pressure may stay high for a while, but then it might regulate. Now, for those of you who have high blood pressure, I'm not suggesting you come off your medication. What I'm suggesting is that when a stressor happens acutely, there is the possibility that things will fluctuate and come back. Now, it could be partial or it can be complete. And finally, there's the optimal situation where you actually not only recover, but that you grow from having gone through that experience that might, on the outside, look like it should have taken you out. So resilience then is an interesting and in some ways complex idea. But again, I think it's important for us to discover as much about it as we can without stepping away from the tremendous challenge of health disparities. Now, after that introduction, I'd like to move to the panel. And I want to thank the panel for joining us. We are so tremendously excited and grateful. And you're not going to hear much from me from this point. I'll maybe drop a question or two here and there. But today, ladies and gentlemen, we are honored and grateful to have with us, first, Dr. Debra Furr-Holden, an epidemiologist and passionate advocate for health equity, a public health professional with broad expertise in health disparities and policy-level interventions towards health equity. She covers a lot of territory, including a focus on drug and alcohol dependence, community violence, and healthcare systems. She served as the Dean of the School of Global Public Health at NYU for the past 2 years, where she led the development of the Department of Global and Environmental Health, raised admissions, and worked collaboratively to develop a strategic plan to guide the institution forward. She was elected to the National Academy of Medicine in 2023. I must say, one of the younger members. Thank you for being with us, Dr. Furr-Holden.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Taylor.
Great pleasure. And next, a man who for many does not need an introduction at all, the Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III, Senior Pastor of Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago. He's a preacher, activist, and author. Over the last 2 decades, Dr. Moss has practiced and preached a Black theology that unapologetically calls attention to the problems of environmental justice, mass incarceration, economic inequality. A third-generation warrior for civil rights and human rights, Dr. Moss is committed to preaching a gospel of prophetic message, I should say, of love and justice. And I would also say that that comes through very loud and clear in a recent publication that I'm going to just hold up here, Reverend, because I enjoyed it so much. I'm on my 2nd time through. It's a fantastic, fantastic volume. Native of Cleveland, and I would be remiss if I didn't say he is an honors graduate of none other than Morehouse College. We're so proud of one of our sons and all that he has done. Doctor of Ministry from Chicago Theological Seminary and a Master of Divinity from Yale School of Divinity. Thank you again, and we are pleased and proud to have you. And
it's a delight to be here. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. To kick things off, I mentioned in my perhaps overly long discussion on resilience and that figure that I think is, again, I thought it was important for us to get some grounding. We're here to talk about resilience and agency, but it has to be said that the situation for African Americans historically has somewhat forced resilience. I think it's important for us, before we get to the sort of very positive messaging, that we contextualize historically and present day what we are dealing with and have had to deal with. So I'll begin with you, Dr. Moss.
First, again, thank you for the invitation to be a part of this conversation. I've been looking forward to this conversation and to be with Dr. Furr-Holden. I'm just very elated to have this conversation. Viktor Frankl, quoting Friedrich Nietzsche, spoke about the fact that when a person knows the why, they can deal with discovering the how. And the African-American spiritual project, regardless if one is within the Christian tradition or other traditions, is unique in that we have discovered a particular why. Howard Thurman puts it this way: once you understand that you are loved by God and you love yourself, it is a revolutionary act that changes everything for you holistically. And we as a community have operated out of this idea, creating free Black space that allows us not just to survive, but thrive. Toni Morrison does a beautiful job in Beloved in terms of creating the idea of the clearing, where Black people were in spaces without a white gaze, but we're in a space where we could gaze at each other and recognize that we are truly, truly wonderfully and beautifully made. That is a part of the spiritual resilience, the spiritual resistance. But there is a system that functions in such a way in the American context that attacks, degrades, and marginalizes aspects of the Black personality, of Black culture, of who we are, and the creation of spaces that allow us to see ourselves as fully human has become a part of our movement, not just policy change, but also dealing with internal actions to allow us to do more than survive, but also thrive.
I really appreciate that comment. Dr. Furr-Holden, you were going to, looks like you were getting ready to say something.
Oh, I'm just appreciating the conversation, and I agree with Reverend Moss. I think it's an important conversation that we have to have. And, you know, you and I have talked offline about this a lot, this idea of resilience. And it is something that we celebrate, but it is also not licensed for us to see the cause of ending oppression. Because while we can overcome and while we have been able to thrive, I think in the face of multiple threats, our sort of birthright, right, is the opportunity to live in a world that works for us as well. So it's a double-edged sword. I'm very proud of my Blackness, and I know that it has done a lot for us in this history and legacy of being able to overcome and thrive. And a lot of my work is centered around how do we deal with these systematic structures and factors that set the stage for us to have to overcome.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I don't know if you want to go into a little bit of the challenge. I mean, historically and what we're facing now. I mean, why do we have to be resilient?
If I could just drop a little bit of the data, I think it's important just to put it into context. I'm surprised at how many people still say, well, we've made a whole lot of strides. And have we? Maybe, but the data don't lie. Black life expectancy still lags far behind that of our white counterparts. African Americans are living on average just under 6 years shorter than our white counterparts. And when you look at all the studies and try to understand the why, we want to point to things like income or education, and those things don't seem to carry the day and explain all of the association. A lot of the factors are outside of the individual. They aren't things that we can control. So if I had a choice, if there was a place before I was born, I got a choice. Debra, would you like to be born in poverty or in wealth? I don't think anybody who knew the difference would choose to be born into poverty. Children don't have a choice over the circumstances that they're born into. Yet if you actually look at the data, if you lived in poverty at least 2 years as a child and you are Black, you have an equal opportunity of living in poverty as an adult. So there's something about how this world is set up where it's hard for us to get out of those circumstances, much harder than our peers. Because by contrast, about 50% of white adults who lived in poverty for at least 2 years as a child will make it out of poverty by 25. There is no lack of brilliance, there is no lack of will, of determination, et cetera, in the Black community, but there does seem to be some disparity in opportunity and access. I think it's those systemic factors that are keeping us in a condition where we are both living sicker and dying younger.
And I think those are important, incredibly important facts and motivation, certainly for what we do. I would want to also ask this question. As we consider, well, maybe I'll tell a quick story. Okay, a woman born in Alabama, and I'm going to talk about a patient in the 20s or 30s, judging from her age. You know, lived among smokestacks and iron smelting factories that her father worked at. He was a coal miner. Brought coal home, coal dust in the air. Started smoking at age 18, and had other health challenges along the way, including diabetes, that should have, according to our statistical analyses, should have ended her life at age 57. She lived to be 92. Now, that's an anecdote. That's like an N of 1. That doesn't prove anything. But if you put it in the context of so many of our other experiences that point to that possibility of longevity. Those instances where people somehow don't succumb. I think it's important that we not look past those as we look at the sort of the group average, that we also keep those instances in mind. 80% of the Black men in the Jackson Heart Study have high blood pressure by the time they're 60, 80, 85%. But we spend very little time considering that 15% that don't get it. You know, who are those individuals? What are they made of? What are their behaviors and habits and so forth? I think we gotta not lose sight of that. But as you say, Dr. Furr-Holden, we have a tremendous challenge with health disparities. I saw the Reverend lean forward a little bit.
Yeah, I was just going to add a couple of pieces that we not only need more data in reference to study. It's two moments. One is the Great Migration. When people, I'm in Chicago, so when people migrated from Chicago, from Mississippi to Chicago, from Georgia to Detroit and other places of that nature, there's some recent scholarship that talks about the foodways of those who migrated and then how they shifted once they were in urban environments. So the foodways of people who migrated: meat once a week, heavy diet of vegetables. Then once we arrive into urban spaces, post-World War II, there is a shift in the way that food is produced and food is provided. First grown, it's purchased at a store. And then post-World War II, we then move into plastic packaging. Which then is cheap and then is sold in many of our communities. Then now let's go back a little bit farther. Let's look at post-Reconstruction. Reconstruction specifically. 60 years outside of the moment of the enslavement period. If we were to take Greenwood, Tulsa, Oklahoma, as an example, we have the data of about 10,000 people living in a 35 block area. Formerly, at least the grandparents and parents, formerly enslaved Africans, were able to create this thriving community. But also you had these local grocers. You had 8 doctors, all within their own private practices, all within 4 blocks of each other. 7 lawyers, all within 4 to 5 blocks of each other. 4 hotels, all within 3 blocks of each other. He had even one farmer, he farmed greens in the morning, and then he had the Zulu Lounge at night for all of the blues music. So here you have this thriving community that also the foodways came directly from farms in the Oklahoma area. Now, all of that is blown up literally. And it would be interesting to look at if we had data in terms of the health of Reconstruction people in the midst of places of what I would call Black free space, where people were trying to create thriving space along with dealing with the policies that were anti-Black. And I think that those pieces would be really helpful for us to understand how the 92-year-old did so well in certain instances in terms of what was a part of her particular culture. Was she a migration person who had particular foodways and practices and communities and relationships? Or was she an urban person that had particular relationships? I think there are all of these correlations that need to be studied to understand the complexity and what we need in order to develop as a community.
That's a beautiful point. And what the center here is hoping to do is to stimulate just that kind of thinking and research that will shed more light on that, on those instances of Black agency, I will say, that is agency of people coming together and making things happen in a positive way and creating that space. Understanding that, you know, as challenging as the statistics that Dr. Furr-Holden has mentioned, that there are challenges ahead. She alluded to the fact that, you know, progress in some areas may be clear, but when you look at some of these health statistics, which are, you know, health is sort of a symptom of how well the society is doing altogether. We have far to go. Dr. Holden.
I think it's 2 points, and you're sort of getting into a world that I think is a slippery slope, but I think we can grapple with it a little bit. There is this idea of individual responsibility, but then there is the very real systematic structural conditions under which people live and experience opportunities for health and well-being. We call those the social determinants of health. My good buddy Daniel Dawes talks about the political determinants of health. And I think it has to be a both and, because here's the reality. We all know, for example, the formula to losing weight and being fit. You got to eat less and burn more. Now, if you really get into it, there's like also not just the eating less, but then eating better, right? The goal is to have nutrient dense foods, not, you know, I always tell people the things without the labels tend to be the things that are the healthiest, right? And that's the goal. But then you're faced with the reality when you go into the market that oftentimes the food without the label is more expensive than some of the stuff with the label. When's the last time you saw a coupon for an apple? It doesn't exist. You can get coupons for chips and things like that, right? So if we acknowledge that we've got sort of a structure, remember, we the people didn't include Black and brown people. We were not at the forefront of what this, you know, nation was built around. And so there are real structural challenges that if we don't deal with those, it's like asking somebody to push a boulder uphill in the absence of no pull for that boulder. And that's what I think the laws and the systems and the structures and the policies, it was laws and policies that put us in an oppressive state. And I think we shouldn't look away from the laws and policies that also need to now pull us out of that state. I think the work of the center, and why I'm like just so, you know, grateful that you're taking this on, is the both and. We can both be working uphill and we can also be working downhill. I think a lot of us have also even lost the history. People don't even understand the origins of much of what they eat. They just eat what they eat because that's what they ate growing up, not realizing that there's a much deeper and better history. My grandfather was born a sharecropper. He was the son of a sharecropper. His dad was a sharecropper. So we grew up in a house where, as Reverend Moss said, we had lots and lots of vegetables, small amounts of protein, and it was a very different diet than I look at the diet that you have in most urban centers now. So I'm looking for really this both and, where we both empower ourselves around individual responsibility, but also do not turn a blind eye to the fact that if everybody had all the knowledge in the world, if you are not resourced for it, if you can't afford it, if it's not available to you, then you're working against the current.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Dr. Holden. There is something that I think that people do not engage, and that is, well, let me back up. One of the worst diseases that Black people have ever encountered is not COVID-19, but COVID-16-19. And that particular disease keeps mutating every generation. And when it comes to food, the agribusiness learned from the tobacco industry in terms of what not to do. The tobacco industry got hit hard in reference to, kind of public call for them to operate in a particular way. Agribusiness, wanting to be able to make a big profit, they're not necessarily concerned about health, they're concerned about profit, were able to create the kind of system and sell that particular system and profit system to the way in which we our food system is structured here in America, which makes us not necessarily healthy, but undernourished in many ways. Dr. Terry Mason here in Chicago has done great work in and around what does a healthy community look like, and how do you build a healthy community, and what systems must be in place, and what policies have to be in place for a healthy community, and what kind of activism has to be in place to create a healthy community, what kind of education has to be in place to create a healthy community. And we have a lot of work that we have to do.
Wonderful. Wonderful. You know, Dr. Furr-Holden mentioned social determinants of health. And although most people on the Zoom will know what that means, we have a wonderfully diverse group. And I'll just go over that definition and then let you guys sort of take over. The CDC says social determinants of health are conditions in the environments where people are born, live, learn, work, play, age, and worship, which is to our theme today, that affect a wide range of health functioning and quality of life, outcomes, and risks. Let's, either one of you can respond because it's both on social determinants and it also specifically brings up faith. I will quote real quickly. There was this study some years ago that looked at church attendance and longevity that suggested that African Americans who attended church at least on a weekly basis had an average of 14 years longer lifespan than those who didn't. A similar group among white individuals lived 7 years longer than whites who did not go to church at least once a week. And now the Black pastors I've given that data to said the conclusion is obvious: everybody should go to a Black church. But I ask that maybe you guys could respond to the fact that church attendance seems to have an impact on overall lifespan and perhaps life quality. What does that say to you?
Well, I think you're referring to that was a Duke study. Wasn't that a Duke study? I think I remember reading that one a few years ago. One, when people have continual attendance, they have there's connections, village connections. People check on each other. They build these particular relationships with each other. Along with that, there is the beauty and the blessing of laughter, of joy, and of music. And what happens when people are in a situation of live music consistently in a space, what singing does collectively for the brain in terms of processing, all of those things happen in the midst. And then knowing the why gives you the how. The understanding that you're loved, you are cared for, that you are made by love, all of that coming together in a particular space. And if you are an elder, there's one study that talks about the importance of elders being connected to children. That's why grandparents conspire with their grandchildren. I know about that very well, just to do anything. But in terms of the extension of their life and health, one senior facility started bringing in small children once a week, not just to hang out with the seniors, but literally to run the halls so that they would hear the sounds of children laughing, along with plants in the building and music. The study showed that there was an improvement in their health in creating that kind of space. Well, a good church should be able to provide those particular aspects also to create a village network that allows people to thrive. It's unique in the ability. Where else can you go and get a song? Where else can you go and sing a song? Where else can you go and have that intergenerational connection? And also, well, some of the food is good, but get some food at the same time And all of these things that would happen in different spaces can actually happen in one space, is unique in terms of the faith village coming together.
I would add something. You know, the data are pretty clear. Faith is a strong, important, and documented driver of health. We've had, several published studies that have shown, literally miraculous results for people who are in treatment or not in treatment, just their overall mental health, their physical health, like that. We know that. My concern, and again, I think Dr. Taylor ties back to this argument that you were, not argument, but the conversation you were unpacking earlier about the complicated nature of resilience, is that I feel like faith is a very individual factor, and you can come together as a community. My concern is when people then try to galvanize faith or hope as a strategy.
Hmm.
And I don't think hope is a strategy. I think hope is something that is critical to our sense of well-being and our sense of self and our community. But it won't undo the very real, systemic, structural drivers of our health. It puts something in our hands. So I take the position, I don't think there's anything wrong with Black people that undoing and ending racism wouldn't fix.
Mm-hmm.
If we could undo and end racism, 95% of Black people's problems, I think, would go away with that problem. Problem is, that's not going to happen overnight. And oftentimes when we look at even these social determinants of health, and people talk about failed education systems, unsafe neighborhoods, high violent neighborhoods, food insecurity, and all these issues, people speak of them in the bigness, and often the people who hold the purse strings and the people who are the ones able to legislate these things will say, but it's too big. We can't do that overnight. So you all just bear with us and like that. And I don't believe in that either. Again, and this is one of the things I'm excited about with the center, this idea that we can both be driven by data. We can say things like white supremacy and structural racism are some of our biggest problems, and people not walk away from the table. We can talk about things like faith and how important that is, because we have to put tools and things in people's hands right now. So I like the idea that we can have all of this. And a conversation I hope we have before we end this is, where are our solutions? What are they? Because my concern, I look at the people who are doing the work, and then I look at the data that we have on what's happening under the skin. Mm-hmm. We have all of these people who are putting their everything into a better, brighter, bolder future for Black and brown people. And often we fall prey to those statistics. We are living sicker and dying younger. Doesn't matter what title you have, how much money you've made, how nice your house is, and all of that. It takes a toll on us. There's something about being Black, fighting for other Black people, being Black, trying to survive the Black experience, that I really hope we can kind of unpack. How do you be a catalyst without being a casualty? How do you affect that change, right? A catalyst will accelerate the pace of a reaction without itself undergoing a permanent change. How do you be a catalyst and not a casualty? And honestly, I got Dr. Moss's book, and I would love it if you would talk about that a little bit, because I feel like you were touching on that in your book.
Absolutely.
I appreciate it. I want to add that hope is necessary, but is not sufficient. I agree with you. It should be categorized as one of the foundational values, but it is not necessarily, as you said, a strategy. But one of the things that I really struggle with is the issue around the colonization of the Black imagination. Meaning that we have to deal with the fact that I think it's Audre Lorde who talks about, taking the master tools to build the master's house, that we have to deal with the fact that if in fact those who, as you said, pulled the purse strings, we remove the idea of white supremacy, will the residue still colonize our imagination? We have to deal with the deep level of this virus and how it affects the way we even look at the world and what we think is even possible. And that's where I think when we begin to take hold of our history and frame it appropriately to give us resilient examples of what can be done. And that's when I, what the center does. I think in terms of the historical aspect, there are some extraordinary pieces that we can utilize in order to frame what we must do instead of saying what we cannot do. To say that this stuff doesn't happen overnight. This is a strat. This is not a sprint.
Yeah.
COVID-19 mutates. We've got to get an inoculation every doggone year. It changes. So we have to know that this thing is going to mutate, and every generation has a specific responsibility to bless not their own generation, but a generation that hasn't been born. We have to begin to build a long-term strategy. And that's where the intersecting of faith, the intersecting of science, the intersecting of education, the intersecting of politics, the intersecting of the arts come together to create a holistic, or let me put it this way, we should be creating quilts to cover our people from every particular discipline.
That was beautifully said. We made several mention of your book, but I'm reminded of that metaphor of your daughter dancing in the dark. And you talked about how everybody in the house was stressed, but she showed that it was possible to stay in touch with your joy, to stay in touch with who she was and what excited her and gave her pleasure without being infected by everything that was going around. Your church was under siege. I wonder if you want to tell that story, or at least some part of it.
Sure, I'll be happy to tell a little bit of it. Just to give a little background for those who are on the webinar. In 2008, there was an individual who was running for president, who was a part of our church, who became president by the name of Barack Obama. I had just become pastor, literally, and I was working out one day, and I looked up on the screen, and somebody had tapped. He said, "Isn't that your church up there?" And there was Sean Hannity going off about our church, and I said, "Well, I got to leave at this moment," and that began a moment where we had 40 news outlets show up to our church every day. The death threats, the letters, myself, my predecessor, Dr. Jeremiah Wright Jr., we had to hire bomb sniffing dogs. I had 24-hour security with me everywhere I went. We had security outside of our house. Every single threat had to be sent to the FBI, to the Secret Service. It was really a circus. The one good thing about it, though, my wife said that because we had security out front, she didn't have to stand outside when the kids were playing. She's like, "Well, the security will follow them." So that she was she was excited. She said that was one good thing. But so one evening, there was some noise in the house, and I made the assumption that somebody was trying to break in because it was I heard some noise, and my wife said, you need to check that out. So I grabbed my rod and my staff that comforts me, and that was a Louisville Slugger walking around the house. And at that moment, I just assumed that this is it. I'm going to have to defend myself and defend my family. I couldn't sleep. And then I heard the noise again. It was coming from my daughter's bedroom. And I go in my daughter's bedroom. It's 2 a.m. and my daughter is literally in the middle of a room dancing, just spinning around. She's about 5, pigtails, just going backwards. I said, "Look, Daddy," I got one of those, very fatherly voices. "Baby, you need to go to bed right now." Because in a few hours I had to preach. This was Saturday night. And that's when it was very clear that the Spirit was speaking, saying, look at your daughter. She is dancing in the darkness. The darkness is around her, but is not in her. And when I heard that, I ran down to my study and I scratched my sermon. I started writing at that moment. The sun is coming up. I'm still writing. I'm going to church writing. That I wanted to be able to share with the congregation what came through my daughter in reference to this moment, that as a people, we have learned how to dance in the darkness. And whenever one is experiencing darkness, it is not that the sun has left. It just means that the earth is turned, and that the earth will continue to turn. And eventually, in the words of the psalmist, joy comes in the morning. And our ancestors learned how to dance in the darkness, that we just we went through the whole role. So that, I think, is an important thing in terms of Black spirituality, is that Black people know how to dance in the darkness. And the question that we have to raise now is that we have to it's okay for us to get some shade, but we've got to stop white supremacy from throwing shade. So we've got to deal with that structure that is blocking light from Black people. And that is part of our, I think, a continual project from generation to generation.
Thank you so much. Dr. Furr-Holden, we are getting close to the end of this incredible hour. And I wanted to give you a chance to say anything you wanted to say. You mentioned that you'd like to at least touch on what to do, what actions we need to think about in light of this sort of the challenge of the environment and the internal resources that we bring to bear to it.
Yeah. So, people love answers. Like, I could give a checklist. We should do A, B, C, D. And I do have some of that, right? And if I were to do that, I like to focus on systems, structures, policies, and laws. And I say laws without enforcement are akin to gums without teeth. So if we have laws, we also have to make sure that they're enforced. We've had things that were designed to try to undo some of these wrongdoings. You look at affirmative action as an example. The largest beneficiary of affirmative action were middle-class white women. It kind of missed the group it was really designed for. If you look at actually who, from a monetary perspective, reaped the most benefits, it wasn't really who it was designed for. So all of those things, more importantly than the check mark, because we've got a lot of brilliance in our community. I'd like to give people a way to think about it. And I will say, I don't know, my youngest daughter is now 22. She was about 6 or 7, avid baker, still is actually graduating college. And I think now going to go on to culinary school. It was the first time we'd ever baked a cake from scratch. And I'm not a scratch cake kind of mom. I'm a box cake kind of mom, right? I might jazz it up. I'm a box cake mom, but she wanted it from scratch. We had a real great time doing it. She's over at the wall oven. She's staring in, waiting for the cake to bake. I'm cleaning everything up, and I see the box of Domino sugar is on the counter, and it is unopened. And I said, oh man, we messed up. She looks over, Mom, is everything okay? I said, baby, we baked the cake, and we forgot to put the sugar in. She's 6 or 7. You know what she said? Well, can't we just sprinkle some on top? Coming out of the mouth of a 6-year-old, missing that makes a cake a cake. If it's not sweet, it's not cake. So I just want us to think about, it's cute when a 6 or 7-year-old tries to sprinkle that on top. You can't sprinkle equity. You can't sprinkle justice. You can't sprinkle share and fair value on human life. But our society got built without that baked in. So instead of just my checklist, it's the broader question. How do we get this? How do we get value on all human life? How do we get fairness? How do we get equity? How do we get love? How do we get that baked into our society? And I think I'd rather people be in that inquiry and generating their own solutions versus just going with the checklist that old Dr. Deb gives them. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Good.
Wonderful.
Yeah, that's
Thank
good.
you. Thank you. Last word, Reverend.
I think the word has already been stated that we don't want to make sure that we are not sprinkling sugar onto the cake. And the reality is that when a cake has been baked that doesn't have all the ingredients, you have to make a new cake. That's the reality. And you can't put any frosting on it and make it look good because you're still going to have the same taste. Which means you're just going to have to start a new cake. And the question for our country is, do we want to make a new cake? Instead of saying, let's make America great again, which is a fundamentally problematic statement on multiple levels, but I'm not going to go there. We should be trying to make America. Du Bois says it this way: we are the yet to be United States of America. And that is a greater truth than operating in a mythology that of antebellum and Confederate fanboys that celebrate an America that never was, but we are trying to create something that is yet to be.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining the Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III and Dr. Debra Furr-Holden and myself, Herman Taylor, for the inaugural center meeting or center webinar. We are the Center for Black Agency and Resilience. Our email is on display now. Please send us your comments. The website is actively being constructed, yet there are some important notes there that you might want to look at and reference. We're going to be expanding the resources section to include some of the publications that have made the speakers today famous, the contributions that they have made in multiple ways. On her way to being elected to be one of the youngest members of the National Academy, Dr. Furr-Holden has published voluminously. And her work, Reverend Dr. Moss's work, we want you to access that through our resource page. And of course, we're on the gram at Center for BAR. Please be in touch with us. This is an exciting initiative that we want you to be a part of. Thank you for joining us.